Welcome to the Gladden Longevity Podcast with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, where our passion is helping you become an age hacker. On this show, we want to help you optimize your life energy, longevity, health, and human performance with impactful and actionable information by answering 4 questions. How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live well beyond 120? And how do we live young for a lifetime? I'm Steve Reiter, and Dr. Gladden, we just wrapped up with Emma Dunwoody. Emma is a human design expert, master coach, behavioral specialist, and host of the #1 global human design podcast. Now, human design, for listeners that don't know, is this kind of report thing that kind of tells you who you are created to be, I guess.
It is. It's kind of a really interesting window into who your unencumbered self might be. Maybe that's the way to think about it,
I
right?
think that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us end up encumbered by things that we've experienced, traumas we respond to, instructions we were given.
Or as Emma said, for me, ways in which I received love and I was given love.
Exactly. So you figured out that this is what I need to do to get love, right? And so she goes through a number of these things. But really, it's such a great conversation because we really start to open up the keys to the kingdom in terms of letting people become themselves, right? Which is like the greatest gift that anybody can give somebody. So it's great.
Well, before we started this interview, I sent Emma my human design report. And when I had sent it, you joked, can you tell me what's wrong with Steve?
I did. Well, I mean, it's a natural question. I mean, what else was I going to answer? No, but we got a great answer.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with Steve.
So for listeners that are interested, as they're listening, we will have the links to Emma's website where you can get your own human design report there. There's also links to other podcasts that she has had for your specific human design types. And so I'd really recommend going and checking it out because I've done a human design report on another website, and I'm definitely going to go back and do mine through her so I can listen to some of those podcasts because there's some good stuff. And for listeners, if you like this episode, please share it with someone that you love. It's sharing that really helps us to get this out.
Yeah, exactly. It helps us a lot. So we appreciate it. Yeah, sending all of you good vibrations here. Good stuff. I think you'll like this podcast a lot. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, and I'm here with Steve Reiter, none other than Steve Reiter, who actually we just found out there's nothing wrong with Steve.
Yeah, our guest is going to talk more about that. But Dr. Gladden, how was your weekend? You were in Miami doing a documentary.
I was, yeah. I got an opportunity to be in Miami being interviewed for a biohacker film that's being produced. It's actually a series called Biohack Yourself. Stephen Klein is doing it, and the Lollies are doing it. And so, anyway, it was interesting. It was an interesting experience. I had dinner with them the night before, and then we did the interview the next day. What I found intriguing is they're actually interviewing a lot of kind of leading biohacking people around the globe for this documentary. So on one hand, it was nice to be included in that. On the other hand, it was really interesting to see how much of a different perspective we were sort of lending to the conversation.
Exactly.
Right?
I've said it before. Your medical background separates you from anyone else that got me into this whole sphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really very interesting. And the concepts of living young for a lifetime, the concept of being 20, the concept of, what is the goal? What is the target when you think about longevity, right? Is it living a long time? Is that the target? Is that what we're going for? And I was talking to them about what my target is, which is to have a 30-year-old body and a 300-year-old mind. That's the target, right? That's what I'm going for, right? And so this was like, you could see the room sort of shifting, and everybody was like, "Oh, let me hear more about that," right? Yeah. So that was fun. And they were very, very astute and had good questions, and so it led to some nice dialogue. So it was fun. Yeah.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah, good. So we have a guest with us today. Speaking of optimizing life and optimizing, I think, a 300-year-old brain for sure. Emma Dunwoody. Emma comes to us as an expert in basically human design. And this is a metric that's used to look at people's, I don't know what you'd say, personality, their psychic construct, whatever it is. But anyway, she'll tell us all about it. So Emma, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Oh my goodness, I wish I was a fly on the wall over your weekend. Bloody hell, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, you would have loved it. You would have loved it. Well, we can have that conversation now. So tell us how you got into this area of human design and define for the audience what it is and how you got there. Maybe give us a little bit more of even a running start. So what did you want to do when you were 10 years old? How'd you end up doing this?
So this is pretty cool. So I'm going to go a little bit earlier than 10 because now I look back at it and go, oh my goodness, it's exactly what I do, basically. But when I was probably, I'm going to say 5 or 6, I was obsessed. One of my best friends there, her parents had just built a new house and they had this back garden that was just rubble. They hadn't even done the garden yet. And our favorite game to play was to go through the rubble and pretend that we were these kids from outer space.
Oh, nice.
We'd come and we were trying to work out these humans, like, why do they do what they do? Why do they do these things?
Fun.
And we would dig through the dirt. And I wanted to be, I was obsessed with Egypt, all of those things as a kid. So I wanted to be an archaeologist.
Right.
But the thing that I think is crazy that I look back at now is that my sort of pivotal moment was a diagnosis at 28 when I was told that I was, I was doing depression and panic disorder, and it was something that I would learn to manage, but I would never heal from.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I was like, no, that's not an option for me. I can't live my life like this, any version of this.
Let me interrupt you for a minute because that's a pivotal moment for sure. But what happens between age 5 and 28? I mean, because at age 5, it seems like you're a superhuman down here trying to figure out human beings. And the next thing we're talking about anxiety and depression and panic attacks. So how do we get from here to there?
Great question. Simple answer, conditioning.
Okay.
So like all of us, right, we are conditioned from a really young age. So 0 to 7, we are the most open to conditioning. So what does that mean? We're trying to work out how to receive love, how to be nurtured, and how to belong. And we create all these behaviors that becomes our identity to get those things. But the thing is this identity isn't who we are in our heart, in our soul. It's who we think we need to be to get these things. So it's this mask that we create.
That's right.
So ultimately, I grew up, even though watching both my parents working in the advertising and the media industry, I was like, I would never want to do that. Sure enough, the first job I get into university, I defer university for a year and I go straight into advertising. So I do that for 15 years.
Tell us about that. Why did you do that? I mean, at that point in time, did all of a sudden advertising seem like, well, I'm familiar with this and that's a good choice? Or it was like somebody made you an offer you couldn't refuse? Or how did it happen?
Yeah, well, it was because it was easy. It was the known.
Okay.
It was the thing that, I'd grown up around this world. I went for this job interview and I kind of knew the people. Like there was one person, it's a very dear friend of my father's. So it was the familiar. And the human brain, as you know, loves the familiar.
Yeah.
So, and they did make me an offer I couldn't refuse. Mm-hmm. But sure enough, I found myself in a position where I was working such long hours, and I've always been a very purpose-driven individual. I've always known that I want to make the world a better place, that my life has to matter. And I've just found myself, deep within the advertising career, like moving very quickly up the corporate ladder and being very aware that I was making the world worse, not better. And I think that this was a large part of, how I got to this.
That's a lot of internal conflict going on, right? I mean, right? You're putting money in your pocket, you're putting, and you're being patted on the back, and yet you're sort of selling your soul to do it, right? So that's enough to get depressed over.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I had my first burnout at 24, and I was told by, the director when I was resigning from the job, she's like, you'll get used to it. Don't worry, you'll get used to it. And I was like, I don't want to get used to it. Like, I don't want to.
Yeah, you don't want to lose yourself, right? You don't want to lose yourself.
Yeah, but me being me, and again, this is within my human design, like I made that mistake a few times. Like I left the industry, I went traveling, I went to London, had a great time over there, but of course came back, went straight back into the industry. So I had to learn the lesson a few times.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How did you rationalize that to yourself the second time to go back into that industry? Because you already had an experience there, right? So,
well, it was the same thing. It was my conditioning. It was the thing that my brain found the easiest. I came back, got in contact with my friends who, predominantly worked in the industry. And of course, they all started throwing jobs at me, and it was easy. It was the thing that I was like, okay, well, I know how to do it. I'm good at it. I'm going to get paid well for doing it while I'm trying to work out all this other stuff.
Got it. Yeah, it's easy to be seduced by that, isn't it? It's kind of the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you that really to become yourself, it takes courage, right?
Very much
because it's really about the power of being able to say no, right? We have no power until we have the power to say no. So
exactly. And break the rules. I think that's one of the things that I've learned over the years is to break the rules that I've been taught since I was born.
Whose rules?
Well, societorial,
the first one. All made up.
Right. Oh, exactly. It's like beliefs. Like my favorite saying about beliefs is like, we think beliefs are true. They're nothing more than convenient assumptions. They're not truths at all. Right. It's just something that our brain tells us we have to do.
Well, you're absolutely right. Somebody made it up, and then they said this is something, and then you buy into it. That's pretty much what happens, right? So,
exactly. Yeah. It's like in the book, The Four Agreements. It's like beliefs are just the things that we agree to. Yeah.
No, this is important stuff. I've been working through some stuff in my own life around this, which is kind of intriguing. So I won't talk about that right now. But so tell us. So you make this. Well, I'm not even sure it's a mistake, because ultimately, I think everything that happens in the end is happening for the good, right? And all of it becomes part of our story. All of us gets us to where we need to go. So you went down this path several times. So at age 28, though, let's catch up to age 28. So you'd been in the industry twice or three times, or where were you at that
point? Twice by that stage. Yeah. And with that diagnosis, I remember sitting there with this doctor, and he was the leading specialist in mental health in Melbourne at the time. And I said to him, can you just tell me how I got here? How did I get to this diagnosis? Mm-hmm. And he just said to me, well, you didn't do anything. It was just hereditary. And I was like, I just knew in my gut that I was like, no, I know that if I can work out how I got here, then I can get myself out of it. I just knew it at like this soul level.
Yep.
So that kind of was the catalyst for me. I went down the first thing I studied was the science of happiness. I had to work out how the brain worked, how happy people's brains worked. And I really started to understand, or at least go down the rabbit hole of human behavior.
This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by the new Gladden Longevity Blood Vessel Formula. The Mediterranean diet is often associated with heart health and longevity, and while red wine is often highlighted, it's actually the herbs traditionally used in this diet where the real magic is.
And Mediterranean herbs such as summer savory, basil, rosemary, and tarragon contain potent antioxidants that have been found to inhibit something called RNOx activity. And RNOx is a major promoter of oxidative stress in the arterial wall, which causes the arteries to age, increases blood pressure, decreases sexual function, etc.
I love that this formula has summer savory because I've never seen it in the fresh herbs section at any of my local grocery stores, even the health ones like Natural Grocers. And to get these benefits in a tincture, brilliant, Dr. Gladden.
Well, I'll tell you, I've heard from our clients and from my own use of it that they love it as well. I just take a few drops or a dropper full and put it in my tea. It is alcohol-based. Tincture is the nutrients are extracted with ethyl alcohol. I drop it in my tea, it tastes good, or I drop it in water, it tastes good. And it's so nice to know that you're getting those health benefits to keep your arteries young. We love it.
Get 10% off your order of the new Gladden Longevity Blood Vessel Formula when you use the code podcast10 at gladdenlongevityshop.com. That's podcast10 at checkout when you visit gladdenlongevityshop.com.
If you want to live young for a lifetime, keeping your blood vessels healthy is key. So check out the new Gladden Longevity Blood Vessel Formula to assist you in your quest to make 100 the new 30. Let's talk about studying happiness. So how did you do that? Yeah. You took coursework, you went to the library, you reflected on stuff, you did psilocybin. Yeah. How did you get to this?
So the first book that I remember picking up was a book called Hardwiring Happiness. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but this book was the first time that someone actually said, started to talk about neuroplasticity.
Okay.
That actually my brain can change, that yes, on some level, this is hereditary. I learnt this behavior unconsciously from my mother and my father, from generations of these behaviors being passed down. My cells have these behaviors, have these things in them as well, but it doesn't mean I'm locked into them. So that's when I started to realize that I could change my brain, I could change my neural pathways by really understanding my focus. Like, what is my reticular activating system focused on, as opposed to allowing this default setting of the negativity bias to run my life and just live from this unconscious, 95% of our behavior is unconscious, right? So live from this very unconscious place. So
I love this
that's
process.
really where I started.
I love this process because really the way I would characterize this is you're actually deconstructing the problem, right? You're actually taking the problem apart to understand, how does it work? How did I get here? What are the pieces? What have I assumed to be true that is actually not true? And who am I at my core? And how do I mix all that around to figure out how I get to where I actually want to go and become what I term my unencumbered self, right? My fully realized unencumbered self, right? So the thing that you had was the grit, quite honestly, to do that, to ask that question, even in the face of this, quote unquote, the best
leading specialist.
Leading specialist, right? But as you were saying that, he's a leading specialist inside of a very particular construct, right? He's not the leading specialist on mental health, that's for sure. He's the leading specialist inside of a particular construct and the rules of that construct. That's all he is, right? So people should understand that when you go to see a specialist, they're working from inside a particular construct, right? They're not looking at it globally. And so what you decided to do was to say, no, I need a global approach. I'm going to start to deconstruct this myself, right? So,
and in many cases, they're looking at the past, right?
Yeah.
So that was the thing that I realized over time, is that, a lot of people that call themselves experts, they're looking at the past. It's like this whole conversation about AI, right? Like, oh, everyone's so concerned about AI, but AI can only look back. We've got consciousness. Like, we can imagine the future.
Right.
And I think that is one of the things that I started to realize, that the power that lived inside of me. And everything that you're saying, it took me a long time to get to human design. I mean, I studied the brain, I studied quantum physics, I studied human behavior, psychology, you name it, I was all over it, all over the spiritual texts, everything. And ultimately what that taught me was to, not believe anything that I was told, to actually start to trust myself, know that I can rewire this supercomputer that sits between my ears. And, over time, after shifting out of the advertising industry, I decided that human behavior was my thing. Okay. And one of the challenges for me is I didn't want to go into psychology because they were always looking back. Right. And coaching for me was the place, because they were looking forward. Now, we were still healing the same things. We were still, looking at trauma. We were still looking at, childhood. We were still looking at these things, but it only came up when it was the speed hump to get where we wanted to go. So we heal the thing and move on.
Yeah, it wasn't the end in and of itself. It was basically something to be processed, deconstructed, understood, healed, if you will, but it was a way to go forward, right?
Exactly. So, I then shifted into coaching. I studied for 3 years, became a master coach, and specialized in behavioral profiling. So I worked with...
Who came up with human design? Was something...
Okay.
What's that?
So this is a great question. And it's one of the questions I think that a lot of people who are very rooted in the scientific world, this is where one of the, what's the word I want to use, like the stumbling blocks is, because the guy who actually channeled the information, he channeled it over 8 days. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, that sounds a little bit too woo for me. But the thing about human design is that it takes 4 ancient wisdoms. So it takes astrology, the Hindu chakra system, the Chinese I Ching, and the Kabbalah tree of life. It takes 4 ancient wisdoms and mathematically maps them together. Now, I'm sorry, there is no human brain that can come up with that in 8 days. Like, that's going to take a long time to mathematically map all of that information together. Yeah. So ultimately, this guy, he called himself, his name was Alan, I can't remember his surname. He was in advertising. He had this mental breakdown, more like a burnout. He disappeared off to Spain, and then found himself having this kind of crazy experience where he channeled information. And I mean, we see channeled information everywhere these days. That, A Course in Miracles is another, brilliant example of it. Mm-hmm. Then, and this was only in 1988, so it's a very, very new methodology. And for me personally, the thing, when I first came to it, I was like, yeah, I don't know, like, where's the research? Like, I want to see the results, blah, blah, blah. And I very serendipitously found myself committing to what in human design we call the experiment. Because ultimately, my background being in behavioral coaching, we sort of give people their behavioral profile. We kind of tell them about themselves. Whereas human design, it's the one that says, well, I'm not going to tell you who you are. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this energetic blueprint, and it's your job to go and experiment with it. And that was the thing for me that I was like, all right, well, I can run an experiment. I'm all for that. I love that. Yeah. In fact, I love to prove things wrong. That was a big part of it for me. Mm-hmm. And as I started to run my experiment, as I started by making decisions differently, because human design actually takes us from making rational, logical, conditioned decisions from the brain, and it moves us back into the body. Now, each one of us has a specific way within the body or our authority to make those decisions. So I just started to experiment with it. And one of the things that I noticed really quickly...
This is kind of like somatic work in some level, where you're actually sort of listening to the body to kind of see what's true and not true for you. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
And I think it's kind of like people who know anything about muscle testing, it's similar to muscle testing.
So let's just talk about muscle testing for the audience. So this is basically where, let's say you think a supplement might be good for you. You could hold it in your hand, quite honestly. And if somebody pushes on your arm and you have good strength there, then that means that it's resonant with your biochemistry, your nervous system, whatever. Whereas if you go weak as you're holding it, then it's probably not in your best interest to take. That's just muscle testing, right? So
exactly. Yeah. And muscle testing teaches us, and this is something that I suppose it was used first with osteopaths and chiropractors. It was this, and I always thought that was weird. Like, how come they get to use the woo thing and it's all normal in their world, but the rest of the world can't use those things? However, the way that muscle testing works is that there is a knowledge greater than the conscious mind or the unconscious mind that actually knows what's correct for us and what's incorrect for us. So muscle testing has been used, and kinesiology has been used for a long time now, and it overrides the mind. So the mind that's going to come up with a decision that oftentimes comes from our conditioning. So what we learnt, not necessarily what is correct for the body. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about human design, it's very similar to that. It's learning to listen to the biofeedback that's happening within our body. And specifically for me, for example, and actually, I'm just going to quickly double check, but I'm sure for Steve as well. Yeah. We both actually make decisions from our gut, but ultimately we have to take a little bit more time. So it's about giving ourselves the time. Like, maybe I'm just going to sleep on a decision. Even my kids now will say, okay, Mum, this is the thing that I want to do, or this is where I want to go, or this is the thing that I need your help with. And they're like, I'll just put it here for you. And then I come back to them with a decision in a few minutes or the next day or something like that, because that's the way I'm designed. Because as soon as you put time pressure on me, I just go straight to the brain, straight to no, as opposed to actually getting into my body and my body giving me the feedback of like, this is correct or this isn't correct. I have energy for this or I don't have energy for that.
So this is a really important thing. I think we're taught to really bypass the body. We're really taught to pay attention to our logical. We talk about, we sort of prize logicalness, right? In school, we're taught logic, exactly. Either from the standpoint of solving logic problems or math problems or defending an answer in a debate or whatever it is. It's all about logic. And so we've kind of canonized logic as the top of the pyramid in terms of how something makes sense or should be decided. And yet, I think everybody listening can probably relate to the fact that you've made decisions that were logically sound, but emotionally were a complete wreck, right?
Yeah.
Right? So then the question is, well, how do you actually get in touch with that ahead of time instead of picking it up on the back end? And so this is what you're talking about, listening to that sort of somatic, psychosomatic sense of what's happening for wisdom and insight really into what really resonates.
100%. And what you said is really, really important. Like when we're making decisions from the logical mind, and again, this, we're actually making decisions from the masculine part, from one side of our mind, from our brain. We're not actually using our whole brain.
There you go. Yeah, the logical side and the intuitive side. She's talking about left brain, right brain sort of stuff.
Exactly, right? So with the intuitive side, what are we taught as kids? Oh, you've got a wild imagination. That was the thing that I was taught as a kid. You've got a wild imagination. Enjoy it while you have it. But quantum physics now tells us that a wild imagination creates a wild reality.
That's right.
So it's this, we've got to stop teaching our kids that imagination isn't true, because it's actually real. It's our creative faculty.
Mm-hmm.
So from a human design perspective, what it teaches us is actually how we move through the world, how we make decisions, how we communicate with the quantum or source or whatever you want to call consciousness. It gives us very specific ways. Like, again, for example, Steve and I are the same again in this situation where our strategy is a strategy called responding. So again, in school, when we're really young, especially men, we're taught to go out and take massive action, like just do it, just get it done. But the reality is that my energy and Steve's energy is actually designed to be in response. So we might think, oh, I'd love to do this thing. I'd love to build a business, or I'd love to start a new program. And instead of just going out and investing energy in starting this thing that I've just had this idea about, I don't start it until I have something external of me to respond to. What does that look like? Well, for example, I'm just launching a program at the moment. And the reason why I launched it when I launched it was because I kept getting people saying, when are you doing the mastermind? When are you doing the mastermind? When are you doing the mastermind? And what did I check in with? My body. And my body's like, I've got so much energy for this. I want to get on it.
Yeah.
So then I put the energy and the work into the program. Whereas the old school way, the way we're designed to do it, is like, have an idea, put all this energy into it, and then if it succeeds, great. And if it doesn't, oh, well, do something else. So human design is all about getting rid of that almost superfluous waste of energy and focus, and actually focusing on the things that are correct for you and potentially that you're very divinely placed on earth to be creating right now at this chaotic time in history.
It's interesting, Emma, that I'm supposed to wait to respond because I took StrengthsFinder 2.0 by the Gallup organization. And my number one strength, so for those that don't know, it's 34 strengths ranked 1 through 34, and they're divided between 4 quadrants. My number one strength is activator, which means I don't sit still. I'm moving. I see an idea and I go for it. But for me to force myself now to have to stop and take a breath and think about it, that's totally foreign to me. Because I was introduced to human design, I want to say it was 3 years ago. And the person that introduced me to it didn't tell me anything about my chart. And so, okay, I don't know what this means, but I took it. Okay. And then it's been hitting more and more often that, hey, human design from various friends. And so for you to be on right now is really timely, I think.
Yeah. Well, I really believe that certain things call us. You said earlier, like, have I been on ayahuasca? I've so wanted to be called to ayahuasca, but I never have, like I have walked an 800-kilometer pilgrimage twice because I've been called. Like, I'm up for it, but I've not been called. And I think a large part of it is because my journey in this lifetime is that I 100% know and have experienced the same states without the plant medicine. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's my journey, right?
Yeah.
Now, the really cool thing that I want to respond to, Steve, that you just said, and this is one of the fundamental reasons why I transitioned almost out of behavioral and personality profiling tools into human design. And that is because when we do these behavioral or personality profiling tools, the StrengthsFinder, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, e-disc profiling, you name it, how do we do it? We answer questions. Now, you might have a really good facilitator. You might be in a room, someone like me, who's really good at getting you to access your unconscious mind, and that's going to give you a more accurate reading. But the thing is that you're still using your mind. So what that says is you're giving me answers in a way that you're telling me who you think you are, not who you energetically are, who you think you are. So what that does is it creates cognitive dissonance. There's this gap between who you think you are and who you really are. Now, what human design does is it doesn't get the mind involved. It's this.
How does it bypass the mind?
So we take the human design chart, from the moment of birth and about 3 months, a reading at 3 months before birth. Now, this is another area of the woo. It's why people are like, oh, well, that's just like astrology.
So it's a little bit. So it has a little astrological element to it, where it's a little bit outside of. It's related to your birthday and birth date, and then 3 months prior. So
and place.
It's a little bit out of your hands, so to speak, at that point, in terms of your cognitive.
So exactly.
Right.
So what happens is at that time, as you guys may have spoken about, you might know about, you might not know about, and I'm just about to interview Bruce Lipton, and I can't wait to have this conversation with him. But at our time of birth, and all the time, we have these subatomic particles that are moving through us called neutrinos.
Yeah.
And for any of the listeners listening, you can go and Google it. There's this huge, I believe, $1 billion facility in Japan that's studying neutrinos. These are the tiny little particles that move through us. And as they move through us, they deposit parts of almost where they've been. So that's how we get these readings at our time of birth, because they're literally leaving this imprint of the planets, the celestial beings, and in human design's case, the I Ching, like all of these little subatomic particles are leaving these themes within us at our time of birth.
So I just was looking at something on neutrinos. Interestingly enough, I've always had an interest in physics, quantum physics, the stars, the galaxies, the universe, right? All this astrophysics. So they were just talking about the fact that neutrinos are generated from neutrons that basically break apart into a proton and an electron, and a small piece of matter goes out, a neutrino at that point in time, right? Which is then, and there are like millions of neutrinos going through all of us right this second, right? They pass through the Earth. There's almost no resistance to them by anything, which is kind of a fascinating thing. So back to neutrinos, they are real. They are measurable by, we have measured them now. So now how does that tie into human design?
So we take that reading from the time of birth and 3 months before, and we put that into, that is how the chart is generated. It's that.
So you're looking at somehow calculating what the neutrino dose was at that point in time, or
it's like where the neutrinos, it's almost like mapping where they'd been, and as they pass through you, like as they deposited things within you at that moment in time. And that's what we call like our natal chart. It's the chart that we were effectively born into. And what that gives us is how our energetic blueprint is designed to be. And it's going to tell us all sorts of, I've talked about decisions, but, for me personally, even the way you talked about me deconstructing my depression, it's part of my design. I have this line 3. I call out what's not working. I constantly make mistakes over and over and again. Like one of my mantras is I'm winning or learning. Like I can't fail. It's impossible.
Right.
But I'm always winning or learning.
That's right.
So the beauty of human design is it often gives us language for the things that we feel inside, but we find hard to articulate.
Interesting.
Simple things.
What would be an example of that?
Okay. So for me personally, I'm a manifesting generator. So I share a lot of similar traits on a high level with Steve because he's a generator. But one of the first things I learned is that my energy is I'm a non-linear being. So what that means is, yes, I'm multi-passionate. I can actually multitask. So there's a lot of research to say that the brain can't multitask. But the way a manifesting generator multitasks is, if I'm doing something, let's say around the house, let's say I'm just going to put some washing on. I don't just put some washing on. As I walk past something, I do that thing. And then I go and do something else. But how that actually almost extrapolates out into my life is my career. So I've worked in advertising. I've also been a chef. I've run an equestrian property. I'm a coach. I'm a profiler. I'm certified in, I don't know how many different modalities, but it's because my energy, I'm a non-linear being. And the whole idea is that I move through life, and often around the age of 40, you look back and go, wow, now I can see how all these seemingly weird things that don't go together do go together. And when I looked back at, when I was at school and I was trying to decide what career to pick, and they were saying, you need to pick one. I was like, no. No, I can't pick one. That feels so uncomfortable.
So
I want to do everything.
Right? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that straight away, I thought I was a quitter. I had all this unresourceful, all these unresourceful beliefs and mindset about myself, where really, now that I've lent into that energy, I'm a very successful entrepreneur. The work that I'm doing I'm having an impact, which is incredibly important for me.
Yep.
I saw this post the other day, like, are you pleasure driven or are you purpose driven? And for me, I'm just like, every day is about my purpose. Every day is about this having an impact. And again, my design, I'm a line 5. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to, my 3 takes all of these experiences and then I universalize it. I have to share it with the world.
I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that are on some level struggling with their life, right? They feel like they've got pieces of it sort of that are working. And then they've got pieces that they haven't either gotten to, like there's stuff I'd like to get to that I've never been able to get to. Like I always wanted to sing, or I always wanted to be an artist, or I always wanted to start a company or whatever. And then they've got things in their lives that aren't working, right? And so, in their current situation, it's just not working. And so what's the advice that you give them? And is this the kind of thing where if they go someplace to a website or something, they can put in their information and get this information and then get coached on it in some way that helps them start to break out of where they are? Is that what we're talking about here? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is such a great question, and it's really powerful because I feel like that you've, summarized the majority of the global population right now. And in many cases where we feel pain and struggle in our lives are the places in our lives that we're not being truthful, honest with ourselves. It's the places in our lives that we're wearing.
That's an interesting way to phrase that, not being truthful with ourselves. I might phrase that a little differently, that we're not actually being our true self.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
A way. It's not like we're lying to ourselves. It's like there's something that's not allowing us in our mind. We've had a blockade to us, allowing us to feel like it's okay to be our true self. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely spot on, because ultimately what it is it's your conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
It's your trauma response.
Right.
It's your, who you learn to be as a child in conflict with who you are on the inside.
Yeah.
That soul, that authentic version of you. So yes, you don't consciously know that you are necessarily lying to yourself. And I think that's one of the challenges for everyone who's on this journey to sort of wake up, to raise their consciousness, is because once you realize these things, once you become aware, like you can't put the stuff back in the box, that's when you really do need to look at these things.
You name 3 things that are reasons why we do what we do to condition. It's to belong, it's to be loved. What were the 3?
And so to be loved, nurtured, and
nurtured.
Belong.
Right.
Yeah.
The
3
loved, nurtured, right. Yeah. And yeah. And it's interesting because there are very few people in the world that ever truly nurture us. There are very few people in the world that ever truly unconditionally love us. And ultimately, those become things that we end up doing for ourselves, I think.
Yeah.
But honestly. So,
well,
yeah.
That's a very, very important point, because, again, we live in a quantum reality. And the truth is that you're right. There are very few people that really, really nurture us. And the thing is that one of the universal laws that we live by is as within, so without. And the reason why we don't have other people fully, deeply nurturing, loving, and accepting us is because we don't do it.
That's right.
We've never been taught to do it. We don't know how to do it. And in fact, we're taught that it's selfish, self-centered, greed, like all of these things. And in fact, it's the polar opposite. And it's my fundamental belief. It's like why I do the work that I do is so that we love, trust, and accept ourselves, so that we access the power that's within us. So we stop giving it away to everybody else and actually stand in our own power. Because again, as within, so without. So if we can love, trust, and accept ourselves as individuals,
that's right,
we can only bring that to the world. We can only see that in the world, and we can help everyone else do the same.
That's right. One of the things I've worked on recently with my own historical stuff, I've made lots of strides. I've healed many things. I've transcended many things. I've had many epiphanies, many realizations, right? The latest piece for me is the idea of being free to love, being free to actually love all the people I come in contact with, right? It's been edgy for me, but it's also been very freeing to think that actually I'm actually free. I'm really here as love. I'm really here as this spirit, this creative spirit to bring joy and have an impact on all these things. But I'm really, truly free to love. And actually the world needs me to be free to love. And I can tell you that when I step into that reality, the world actually changes around me. The conversations I have, the people that reach out to me, the way people look at me and walk up to me and want to talk to, it's mind-bending how it changes your reality when you step into your true self and you stop criticizing yourself the way you were criticized when you were little, right? Or try to stay inside the box that you were put in when you were little, right? So it's edgy. Just so the audience knows, this is edgy work, right? And so it's so rewarding. And I know Steve's nodding his head, and so is Emma, right? So Steve has done this work and is doing it probably, and you've done it and are doing it, right? So it's very cool.
Yeah. And I think like it's so profound what you just said. And it's that whole like, it seems so simple, yet it isn't. Like people don't find it easy to love unconditionally.
Right.
I mean, we talk about mother's love being unconditional, but in most cases it's not,
Yeah.
you know, like we've not been taught unconditional love. And yes, it's in us always.
Yeah.
But from the moment we're born, we're separated, we're judged, we're criticized. So that's what we learn to do with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the moment that we start to, you know, we make a decision, we make a choice. Okay, well, I'm going to practice. I'm going to choose love. You know, going back to A Course in Miracles, it's simple. We see we act in our world in two ways: fear or love.
Mm-hmm.
And when we choose love, from a quantum perspective and bringing in the scale of consciousness, when you choose love, you immediately go up the scale of consciousness. And what happens is that you get access to different ideas, different people, different knowledge, different everything.
Yeah, it's a different vibration, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so important that we're choosing that. And I feel for me personally, in my personal experience and the thousands of people I've worked with now, human design is kind of like the fast track to authenticity. Oftentimes you come to it in the beginning and you're like, and this was my experience, like, nope, I don't want to hear that. You know, like, don't tell me who I am, blah, blah, blah. But then you just run the experiment and you give it a shot. Mm-hmm. And ultimately what I discovered is everything that I resisted in my human design was how I resisted me, being me. It's where I judged me. It's where I criticized me. You know, one of the things, Steve, I would suggest or just pop on the table is that I would guess that as a kid, you got love from being the activator, from getting stuff done, from moving fast, all the things. So, of course, it becomes your highest value. Your unconscious mind's like, doesn't matter what you're feeling, body, we need to make this happen because this is how I get loved. But if you actually run the experiment of slowing down and being in response, you'll probably have the same experience as me, as your entire life will shift, because all of a sudden you are in alignment with your heart, with your soul, with your purpose, you know, these things that are bigger than the meat suit we get around in every day. It's the whole thing, right?
Nice. Yeah, beautiful. How's that resonate, Steve?
Yeah, exactly. It's something I've definitely been learning to quiet myself, to spend time in the sauna, spend time in nature, just processing and thinking through things. Emma, my question for you is, since I'm really new to this and I've had someone kind of explain my chart in the last few months, tell me more. Tell me what else do I need to know about my report that I have?
So just so the audience knows, Steve had this done a little while ago, and he just shared his report with Emma via a chat function here on the call, just so you're aware of what's happening. So now we're going to get a true read from Emma, I guess.
Yeah.
So
yeah, cool. I love this. So starting off, you are what we call an emotional generator. So a generator, and I love to look at so much of human design through the frame of purpose because it's the thing that really lights me up. At the end of the day, the container of your purpose is that you're here to build the things that light you up. You have energy to create this reality that we live in. Generators are here. They're creating the life force energy that's on the planet. Now, in the past, that energy has been used and abused in factories, in corporate, in whatever. It's like just pushing you to work, do. But what you want to transition into is the things that light you up. Because when you follow the things that light you up, that you have energy for, so your body, your sacral, your gut will literally say, yes, I have energy for this, or nope, I don't have energy for this. And when you trust those things, then you're going to be a very powerful creator.
My experience of this, and I've never done this, but I've been doing this kind of in parallel to it apparently, is that when you hit that, and Steve, you may have had this experience also, all of a sudden you just feel lighter. Everything is weightless. Everything becomes effortless, right? When you step into that sense of really who you are, right? Just so the audience understands this, that's a reference point. It's like when it feels completely effortless and just light and easy, this is a good reference point that you're kind of on track.
Exactly.
When I was in college, I remember I wanted to get into sports medicine, athletic training, that kind of stuff. And I wasn't able to get into the program because of a bunch of circumstances. And so I took a year and a half off of school to figure out what the hell do I want to do. And I remembered when I was in fourth grade, my uncle bought us a Fisher-Price cassette recorder, and I made radio shows with my friends. And then I remembered sixth grade, I hosted a radio segment at a kids radio segment at a local radio station. And then when I was a senior in high school, a friend that I knew since the first grade, we were working on a radio spot for the morning announcements. And she looked at me and she said, "Steve, I've never seen you smile like this." And I remembered those three things during that time off of school. And I was like, yeah, radio, audio production. Yeah, that'd be fun. And as soon as I went into that, it was like, it came easy. Radio and production and content creation and thinking about story, those kinds of things. It's always come so easy to me.
Nice. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And you know what's super cool about this is the next part that I want to tell you about is it's what we call your profile. So it's these two numbers, and you've got a 1-3 profile. And the 1 is the researcher. It's this person that's like wants to get to the bottom of things, and it's the person that wants all the information and all the answers and creates foundations not only for themselves but for others. Does that resonate?
Well, yeah, exactly. With my health journey, with me trying to get, some additional insight into my late wife, all of that kind of stuff. Yes, I'm very much an investigator. Once I heard that term biohacker and it started resonating in my spirit, it was like, okay, I got to dig into this. And that's ultimately how I found this guy right here.
Yeah. And the other number that you've got a 3 like I do. And this 3 is all about experimentation. So these are the learners that learn by trial and error, the experiential learners, the people who, like, I love to joke, like, can you just let me run into the wall a few times? Because I just need to work this stuff out.
Yeah.
Like, they'll tend to be messy with the way they learn. When they let go and accept that they're going to be the person that sometimes it's going to take you 3 times to work it out, but the things that you worked out that didn't work are just as important as the things that did,
100%.
then you're set free. It really sets you free, because these are the people that are here to call out what doesn't work and to find out what does. And yeah, when you've got a 3 in your profile, you are someone who's going to want to live a more unconventional life. You're going to want to adventure more and be playful and sort of, as I would say, break stuff and remake stuff. So they're very, sort of experiential type people.
Cool. That's very cool. One of the things about that for the audience, if that sounds weird to you, is that people that are like that, and I sort of feel like I'm in that same category, right? I'm a 8 quick start, and I'm, if you can show me anything, but it's like, no, let me play with it, right? And then I'll figure out what it actually does, right?
Yeah, I have no questions until I have an experience.
Right?
Once I have an experience, all the questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then I feel like I come away with such a more comprehensive understanding of it, like what it can do, what it can't do, where it works, where it doesn't work. Whereas if somebody simply tells me it does this and I go and do that, I feel so limited in my understanding, right? And so that's why I like to play. And I think this is what you guys are saying too, right? So so for the audience, just understand that this not playing by the rules, trying stuff out, taking a softball and hitting it with a hockey stick just to see what happens, right? This is right. This is how we learn. This is how we figure it out. Yeah.
And I mean, I was diagnosed in grade 2 with dyslexia. So I didn't even read a book cover to cover until I was 31 because I just thought I was stupid. Again, it was my conditioning. In my early 20s, I read something that one of the oftentimes, like in the 90-something% of dyslexics are also on the genius scale.
Yeah.
And of course, my beliefs, boom, changed. And all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I can do whatever I want to do.
That's it.
And it's a lot of that line 3. That line 3 is I didn't have the line 1 talent of taking in knowledge and deciphering it, but I did have this, like, give me a go at it. Like any sport, I'm an intuitive modeler. So you show me something and I'll do it. So if I had this and I raised both of my kids in alignment with their design, like if I had this as a kid, then I wouldn't have been diagnosed with anything because I just would have been learning a different way. But the last thing I want to share for you as well, Steve, because you have one of the things in the design, and the human design is so complex and there's so many layers. And if you're curious and you're listening, you can get your free chart on my website, and we send you very specifically to each podcast episode for your design. So it's there to plan it out for you. But one of the other areas that I just want to touch on is the incarnation cross. So the incarnation cross was described in the original knowledge as the job description of our aura. So it's not something our mind needs to get attached to, but it's something that our energy is doing all the time. And you actually have this cross of the Sphinx. So one of the fundamental things that you're on the planet to be and to do is to be that pivotal person that helps people change direction. So what that means for you personally is that you can probably look at a number of times in your life where you felt completely lost. And you may be freaked out in that time because the nothingness can be scary. And that's just the shadow expression. But what I want to give you today is this new belief, because whenever you feel lost, it means that there's something powerful. There's a new direction just around the corner, because otherwise you wouldn't feel the way you were feeling. And also know that in so many cases, that's how people feel when you turn up in their life. And when you turn up in their life, you help them find this new direction. And you mightn't consciously do it and say, take this step and that step and that step. But I mean, you could be sitting next to some random person on the train and you're reading a book and you're like, for some reason, I just got to give you this book. Boom, new direction. It can be that simple. Does that resonate with you at all?
Oh, yeah. Big time. Definitely.
Nice. So is it that Steve ends up walking into people's lives when they're in that state of being befuddled, so to speak? Is that what we're saying? Yeah.
But I've also seen that in my life where I'm feeling that darkness and like, oh crap, what's the next step? What am I going to do? I hit a brick wall over here and what's next? I've learned through trial and error over the 49 years I've been on this planet to just sit and be like, okay, something new always comes up. Always does. Just wait for it.
Yeah. And that's actually like, because of the energies that sit in your cross, like it's the creative spark. And many people can't wait in the emptiness for the creative spark. But if you can sit in the discomfort of not knowing and having nothingness around you, and I don't know, because the human brain doesn't like, I don't know, then the creative spark hits.
Yeah, very interesting. So Emma, how would people go to your website? How would they find if somebody wants to take the human design question?
Yes, super easy. Just go to emmadunwoody.com and there's a free chart. You just can click on your free chart. You'll get that. As I said, my COO has set up the most epic back end of the entire business, because that's part of her design, to make sure that everyone can get very specific help with each part of their chart. And I've got that many podcasts that people can check it out.
Beautiful.
And what is the name of the podcast?
It is the Human Design Podcast.
Okay. Nice. Well, beautiful. It's been a lovely conversation with you, Emma. We really appreciate you being on the show. So
thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I feel like I want to know what happened at your biohacking conference, because it's one of my absolute favorites. I'll have to have you on my podcast to talk all about the biohacking stuff. I just turned 49 yesterday as well. So
good for you.
Yeah, I'm all about longevity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've got a birthday tomorrow too. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
70.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he does not look it, and he does not have the energy of most 70-year-olds.
I'm 27.
I love it.
I did some hiking with him when he was here in Colorado Springs in the fall, and we had a really good hike.
We did. Yeah, it was fun. I'm going to mountain bike tomorrow. I'm taking the day off. I'm going to mountain bike in the morning. The waves are not that great out front. I'm here in Puerto Rico, but if they look a little better, I may paddle out and catch a few and then go for a mountain bike ride.
Nice. Well, you better come to Byron one day if you're a surfer, because it's absolute surfing in here.
No, it's beautiful over there. I've been over a few times. I've been to Tasmania, which is why I asked you, and I've been to
the water's
Gold
cold.
Coast.
Cold in Tassie.
Yeah, it's cold down there, but it's beautiful too. It's like no place I've ever been. Yeah, and I got down to, is it Melbourne? Yeah, I think I got down to Melbourne. Yeah, it's beautiful too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good. Lovely to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. If you would like more information on what we've discussed or other topics, please reference the show notes or go to gladdenlongevitypodcast.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching Gladden Longevity. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to get future episodes delivered to you, and share our podcast or this episode with someone in your life that you may find benefit. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode. The Gladden Longevity podcast is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The use of any information and materials linked to this podcast is at the listener's own risk.